Cyber attacks increased 13% on businesses last year alone. Solution? Cyber self-defense classes.
Karim is checking his email, and there is a spam. And where there's spam?
There's malware.
So, spam! No more spam.
I think that went really well. We all learned a valuable lesson.
Orange Cyber Defense.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are, or good morning. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on OT security. I just want to check in with the producers that the slides and the sound are okay. Oh, they let me know if they aren't. Thank you. So yeah, welcome. We know that your time is precious. That we know that there's a lot of content out there, and so we appreciate you giving us some of your time for this webinar today. We're here to discuss OT security, and specifically to discuss the scope and the scale of threats against OT environments. My name is Charles van der Walt. I'm the head for security research at Orange Cyber Defense. And I'll be moderating today's session. So the work that we're sharing with you today is derived from work that we previously published in our annual Security Navigator report. It came out in around November last year. It's a mammoth report. And so what we've been doing over the last few months is to have a series of webinars where we kind of dip into specific themes that emerge from the Navigator. And today's webinar is to discuss the work we did around OT security, what the current state is, and where we perceive the future of OT-related threats will be going. The work subsequently, I'm very proud and excited to say, has attracted a fair amount of attention. And so Rick, who will be joining us today, also has been invited to speak, for example, at the SANS ICS Summit in the UK. He'll be speaking on OT security at the Insomniac conference in Switzerland later this month. And then finally, Rick and I will also be traveling to San Francisco next month for the RSA conference, where we'll be presenting further work. And our approach today is I want to have a bit of a conversation with Rick to kind of tease out the key ideas that he surfaces in the Navigator and in these other conference talks. And then we want to make space for a broader conversation with some of the other specialists from Orange Cyber Defense who have an interest and experience in OT. And I'm really excited by the panel we've managed to pull together for this session. Firstly, I mentioned Rick Derbyshire. He is a senior researcher on my team with a PhD and is a real expert, a specialist in the field of OT security. Along with Nick, we have Nicolas Parou, who joins us from France. Nick has a very unique job in that he runs our OT SOC, which we think is a unique capability through which we assist our customers to detect and respond to OT threats in their environments. Originally from the Netherlands, but joining us today from Germany, where he's on site with a customer actually, is Jeroen Wijnands. Jeroen is the OT security lead in the Netherlands and has basically a career working in the field of OT and OT security. And so and then finally we have Simone. Sorry, Simone Kraus. I always forget someone. Simone is a security analyst, also attached to our office in Germany. Simone is a very capable and prolific threat analyst who also has an interest and has spoken previously at big international events on the subject of OT security. So what we'll be doing is when we've had a chance to chat with Rick and we kind of have the background, we have the key thesis that he's presenting, we want to open up the floor to you also to share your questions with us. I'm going to do my best to moderate those questions, direct them to the panel, and hopefully simulate some conversation about the elements of the OT security question that most interest you. So OT security is not a new issue. And I think everybody remembers, they say everyone remembers where they were on 9/11. I think everyone also remembers where they were when Stuxnet happened. Stuxnet was the big security event that kind of reshaped our perception of the threat of nation-state capabilities, the potential for real geopolitical impact, but also the potential that OT attacks could have a real kinetic impact. And this concept of like cyber physical systems emerged. And so, I look back, that was reported in 2010. And today in 2023, we're seeing similar stories also about significant OT-based environments being impacted by cyber attacks. So I wonder, Simone, if I can start with a question to you. Before Rick talks to us about his research, tell us a little bit about, or give us just a high-level view of the kinds of incidents we're dealing with today in terms of that would qualify, if you like, as cyber physical events.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me. Yeah, great question, Carl. Some of the latest threats we see or attacks are related to the last few weeks geopolitical environment. For example, the water treatment facility in Pittsburgh that was attacked by an Iranian group called Avengers, hacking a known part of the booster Unitronics, which has components that are Israeli owned. And we also see more disruptive attacks also in the Ukrainian conflict. For example, using Viper malware like Caddy Viper, and also the latest China attacks on the critical infrastructure. We see botnets, we see DDoS attacks, and also occurring in the OT environment in the context to pre-position the threat actors in a real world harm to, for example, also American citizens or European citizens on communities, if there would be a real conflict that they are in our systems. And we will see this more and more common, that they attack our critical infrastructure or at least try to get into the systems.
Thanks, Simone. Yeah, so these, these kinds of stories, these kinds of narratives that we encounter every day now, I think are really alarming. And, researchers, professionals, policymakers, the like, are really concerned, I think, about this, the potential of a cyber attack having some kind of real world impact. I don't know, my sense is that you're almost getting overwhelmed with the almost sort of panicked sense of expectation around this threat that OT attacks are going to have some massive kinetic effect. But of course, Rick, although these examples are scary, and obviously although these kinds of things like Stuxnet the impact could be extremely far-reaching. But not everything that we're told, or not everything I think that we maybe choose to believe about OT attacks is entirely accurate. And I remember when you started working with us, one of the first things we set out to do was to evolve a picture of how many attacks actually do impact OT systems. And that work, I think, started a journey that eventually ended up with what we published in the Navigator report. So share with us a little bit about that journey and what you discovered during that journey.
Absolutely. So early in 2023, we were discussing a blog post and eventually published something that kind of went along the narrative of, we're seeing a lot of marketing and fear, uncertainty, and doubt of these kind of stereotypical state-sponsored or state attacks against critical national infrastructure and these really sophisticated attacks. But when you actually read between the lines and you looked at the actual incidents being reported, it didn't really seem the case. And we were basically saying this without any actual evidence at the time. It was more just like, look at these reports. It seems that way. So for this year's Security Navigator, we brought the receipts and we looked at 35 years of cybersecurity attacks that impacted operational technology. So over those 35 years, when we started analyzing, there were a few things that jumped out that were really kind of validating to what we were kind of suspicious of. That was really quite interesting. So the first thing that's on the slide here is that 58% of all attacks over those actual 35 years were instigated against manufacturing organizations. Which already is kind of a little bit removed from critical national infrastructure. You may argue that there are certain sectors of manufacturing that could be under it. Moving a bit more towards CNI, we have transportation and warehousing as the second most frequent victim of OT impacted cyber attacks. And then finally, we actually get to utilities, which is the kind of like the solid actual critical national infrastructure. It's not until we have that third most frequent victim that we actually start really seeing that kind of stereotype take shape. And then the rest of the 11% are kind of more small sectors. But it's not just the victim sectors themselves. It's actually also the adversaries that are perpetrating those attacks. Again, across the 35 years, we actually see 61% of attacks being perpetrated by criminals, not state actors. In fact, in second place, in a very far second place of most frequent adversaries is when we see states at 13%, which is really quite small in comparison to the kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that you'd be seeing in typical marketing. And then going further on, we have unspecified hackers, which just to explain quite quickly, because it seems like a weird one, collecting data for these kind of attacks, especially over such a long period of time, is quite difficult to really pin down who did something. But in certain situations, there was definitely, you know, a live adversary, a live hacker, I guess, actually doing something. It wasn't malware, or it wasn't an accident, but it was never really pinned down. There was no clear motivation for what the attack was. And then we kind of go through with insiders being the fourth most frequent, which is kind of to be expected with OT attacks, because typically you need a lot of insider information, you need a lot of information about the actual physical environment to build up what's known as process comprehension to do sophisticated attacks, at least. But yeah, that's it's weird, right? So we were seeing these over the 35 years, we were seeing like manufacturing being hit so prolifically, and criminals causing these attacks, that we kind of had to kind of start drilling down. And one of the things that we collected was the year of the attack. So if we move slides, when we actually broke it down by year, things started to be a little bit more clear. What you see is a massive uptick in 2020. So everything remained quite stable from 1988 up until 2020, and then we saw this huge uptick, and that's when manufacturing really started to take shape as the prominent victim sector, as well as in 2022. You may guess of the things that happened that year. We saw transportation and warehousing also be impacted quite significantly. But then when we move over to the adversaries over time, if we could change slides, please. We obviously have the same volume of attacks happening every year, but this is obviously adversaries instead. What we see is that as well as manufacturing becoming more prominent in 2020, even more so criminals became more prominent in 2020 as well. And basically the variation of adversaries and the variation of victim sectors as well, both essentially broke down and became almost monolithic at that point. So this is a weird thing that we saw, where we were saying, okay, so why are we getting so many attacks that are impacting manufacturing basically perpetrated by criminals at this point. So we needed to dig a little bit deeper. So if we move slides again.
Rick, if I can just interrupt you there, I just want to clarify something because a question has already come in. So this data refers to obviously publicly visible or publicly reported attacks, right? So we need to anticipate that other incidents will have been kept secret, or there's no obligation to report, and there would have been others that we don't know about. But these also would be, the language here really is that there's an impact, that this is an incident. It's not an attempt. We're not talking about firewall logs, right? We're actually talking about something where there was a sufficient impact for it to be reported.
Absolutely. So perhaps I should very quickly speak about the criteria for which we collected this data first. So the first, it had to be a cyber attack, a verified cyber attack, and it had to have caused an impact to the operational technology environment. And these two things are really important because there are a number of cyber attacks that get reported as OT cyber attacks where the OT actually doesn't get impacted whatsoever. It is an organization that happens to utilize operational technology and they suffer a cyber attack in their IT, but the OT just continues as normal. There is no impact to the production process. But also we wanted to verify that that was also a cyber attack as well, because maybe certain boats hitting certain bridges where people decided that those were cyber attacks that actually weren't. They were other different reasons for things to happen. So we didn't want engineering incidents also entering the data set. So yeah, these are definitely attacks that were successful and did in fact impact the operational environment.
But some of that ambiguity, about what that impact was and where the impact occurred, I think is then what prompted you to develop this classification system.
Absolutely. So we'll get to that in a second. So we wanted to break down. We understood that that we were seeing a significant jump in victims in manufacturing, and that was being perpetrated by cyber criminals, everything from 2020. So to start kind of moving on from that, to start really understanding what actually happened, what were those, we decided to go more granular. To understand that, I want to introduce everybody, if you're not familiar, I'm sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs with this, is the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture, which is also known as the Purdue model. Now, this should not be treated as some way of actually architecting your environment. This is a reference architecture, which essentially means it's a logical way of understanding things. It's almost a way of just having a conversation about things. That's the main reason that it's used today. But when we consider levels 5 and 4, we're going to go backwards in numbers here, starting from the top. Levels 5 and 4 are your typical IT. And then in level 3.5, we have the demilitarized zone, which is something that organizations that use OT try and implement to separate the IT and OT. They'll have things like jump boxes in here that allow IT to transfer to OT. But essentially, this is the legacy of the air gap at this point. And then levels 3 through to 0 are where we find the operational technology. And this clear distinction between IT and OT is something that we use to truly understand these kind of attacks. Not getting into too much detail, but yeah, let's have that clear separation that there is IT, a DMZ, and then there is OT. We don't need to go into any further detail. And using that knowledge, we can then go on to the classification that we made, which was a very simple taxonomy. The two categories that we consider are attacks that used only IT tactics, techniques, and procedures, and then attacks that also included or only used OT tactics, techniques, and procedures. So we separated those out into those two categories first. And then with the IT TTPs, we then split those out between those attacks which impacted operational technology through just an IT targeted attack. This is where the OT will either have been taken offline as a precaution, or a dependency will have been taken offline in the IT that meant that the OT had to stop. The second within IT TTPs is 1B, which is IT/OT targeted. And this way may be where an adversary either was opportunistic and managed to get to the operational technology environment on purpose, or maybe the demilitarized zone or air gap was so bad that they just happened to get there accidentally. And typically we'll see the same kind of thing where OT is taken offline as a precaution. It's typically not something where the OT is very deliberately impacted. And then finally, in that category, first category is an OT targeted attack just using IT TTPs. And this is where we start to see things like engineering workstations, historians, those kind of like SCADA servers to be attacked. But we're not seeing things like the traditional, what you'd really consider operational technology, such as programmable logic controllers, those kind of things being targeted in any sophisticated manner. Then moving over to category 2, we have just two types. First, and sorry, they are both OT targeted at this point. To use OT TTPs, you have to target OT, of course, but they're split out in their sophistication. So first is like nuisance attacks, crude attacks, things like using the stop CPU command that's been a metasploit for over a decade now. And then the final type of attack is sophisticated OT targeted attacks, and these are the ones where they use things like the process comprehension as a tactic to understand the operational technology environment, work out how the operational technology is working with the physical world, and do things that are really quite sophisticated, such as manipulating the physical process while keeping the engineers in the dark about what's actually going on. Think attacks like Stuxnet, and there are more recent things like PipeDream and stuff like that. So when we actually started to look at how these attacks were shaped in the face of this taxonomy, we started to kind of see what was going on. The big burst in attacks that happened in 2020 were almost exclusively attacks that used IT tactics, techniques, and procedures, which were still not there as to what's going on, but it's starting to kind of make sense that we're not seeing this big rise in adversaries that are developing their OT attacking capability. It's still adversaries that are using IT tactics, techniques, and procedures to do these attacks. But then when we kind of start to look at it from a different viewpoint, if we change slides.
Slacking, sorry.
Don't worry about it. That's when things become very obvious, because if you look at the top right, we see two things. First is a loss of productivity and revenue as defined by the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But when we actually define things as well as we include impacts from the MITRE ATT&CK framework for ICS, the other one was the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS. When we include the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we see data encrypted for impact, which kind of makes things very, very obvious at this point. What we're actually seeing is a significant rise in 2020 of essentially ransomware attacks and cyber extortion as a kind of a wider tactic there. And what's happening here is that organizations are having their dependencies taken offline when they get encrypted, or because they have no confidence in the resilience of their operational process, they just take it offline as a precaution. And with this huge rise of double extortion and within it ransomware and ransomware as a service that started really coming to life in 2020, that's why we're seeing operational technology be affected as well. And the final thing in this long soliloquy that I want to point your eyes to is the bottom right, where we see some impacts that are exclusive to category 2 attacks, the OTTTPs. The most common of which is manipulation of control, which anyone that's familiar with OT, especially anyone who is responsible for OT assets, this is something that's really quite worrying, because manipulating the control is showing a significant more amount of understanding of the environment and more capability to actually be able to deliberately manipulate control rather than do something that is nuisancey as just like turning a PLC off or just using stop CPU. So I found that pulling out these category 2 specific impacts was really interesting. And that's actually it for the kind of like the data that we were looking at for now, at least.
So yeah, that's super interesting, Rick, and it presents a real dichotomy, doesn't it? Because what we're saying is overwhelmingly and increasingly over time, what we're seeing is attacks against IT, apparently primarily for encryption and ransomware, represent the bulk of the incidents that we become aware of. But then there is this small component that you also can't ignore of crude OT-based attacks like data destruction, disk wiping, etc. And then this this component that are actually quite sophisticated, right? And I'm guessing for those category 2 type attacks, and specifically 2B, there we probably are looking at state-backed actors, right? So it's this tension, I guess, between the probability of what's going to happen statistically, and then the potential impact of what's going to happen in the worst case.
Interestingly, just to kind of add to something, the more sophisticated attacks, while kind of the whole point of this exercise was we aren't actually seeing that many state-sponsored attacks or state attacks. Interestingly, we saw almost as many hacktivist attacks doing sophisticated TTPs in OT as we did state-sponsored attacks. However, we have to be very cognizant of the limitations. We were collecting publicly known attacks, data from publicly known attacks. There is a very good chance that a lot of the very sophisticated state-sponsored attacks are something that we just can't collect data on, especially in a large-scale study like the one that we did for this. So yes, this may not be the very full true picture, but it's at least the best that we can do with what we have.
Rick, we've got several questions about this data coming already.
Yeah.
So I want to take you back, where should we go? Maybe to this slide as a start. And the one question is just about the volumes. I think it's a little bit self-answering. The question was just, what are the volumes of attacks, or what are the numbers of incidents? And I think you can see the numbers there, right, on the y-axis.
Overall, okay. So this is one of the interesting things as well. We opted not to talk about the methodology in this webcast because it's a long-winded thing. I come from academia, so I'm very sorry about how rigorous that may have been. If you read the chapter that this is based on in the Navigator, we actually do discuss the methodology. But we did a very strict set of criteria that we pushed everything through. And over those 35 years, the actual final resulting volume was 119 cyber attacks. And that's because we wanted to collect specific data points for every entry. So we wanted to collect a lot of things about where the country the victim was, which wasn't very interesting. It was kind of the same as every other thing. We wanted to collect what sector the victim was in, obviously, what type of adversaries. We looked at things like initial access vector and things like this, and we had to hit a certain number of criteria for an attack to be counted. And what this did was made sure that the attacks that we were including actually were like valid. We weren't just including any old reporting that was unreliable. These were corroborated from multiple sources to actually be included. So while this isn't the most voluminous data set, actually we made sure that these were valid attacks that actually happened. So yes, 119 over the full data set attacks. And yeah, I think we saw the most was 35 in 1 year, which was 2022.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that kind of answers a question that came in from Rick van Dijk about the origin of this data. He asks, is it based on the ICS Strive, or is it our own data? And Rick, to that, the answer is this is our own data. We collected this data, but we collected it from public sources. Yes, I wonder, just to give the audience a voice break, is there anyone on the panel who works with ICS Strive at all that can just explain to us briefly what it is, because that's not something we tackled in this webinar?
So I can, if you want.
Go, Rick. Go.
Yes, we did use ICS Strive as a source. ICS Strive is not quite as stringent with the criteria as we were, so not everything from ICS Strive got included, but it indeed was one of the sources, and it provides its own sources as well. So yes, we used academic papers. We used a few sources. There's a source on GitHub which I really badly I'm sorry, I forgot the name of right now, but I'll make sure to find it. And we use a lot of vendor reports and indeed ICS Strive, and we corroborated these entries from multiple sources such as that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah, that's a much better answer than mine. Rick, and then sticking with this data, we got a question from Ludo about the dip in 2023. What's your explanation for why 2023 looks so low compared to 22 and even 21?
So 2022 is such a significant spike because although we saw a bit of a lapse in cyber extortion attacks happen, we actually saw a significant number of OT attacks happen. So that's why there's this big spike there. And 2023 looks significantly lower because these attacks take a while to filter through, especially with the richness of data that we required to be included in our data set. So because we released this in around quarter 3, quarter 4 of 2023, a lot of attacks that had happened throughout 2023 didn't really trickle through to have as rich data as we actually wanted for the data set. So we kind of cut off around August, September time. So we didn't really see a few attacks. If we actually redid this now, 2023 would perhaps be significantly higher, and we'd see start to see a few in 2024 as well, I think.
Got you. All right, and then I think a final question on this slide, if I may, is from Abdulaziz. No, not from Abdulaziz, sorry, from Emerick, about the 2015-2016 attacks against the Ukrainian electrical power plants. I can't remember if that was Black Energy. But would they be reflected in this data?
Yes. So the attacks on the Ukrainian power grid, we did include, and I believe that they would have been included under utilities. So we were using the North American industry classification system for classifying the actual industries. So that should be under utilities, and it would probably be under state attacks, I think.
Okay. All right, cool. Rick, and then I'm going to interrogate you just a few minutes longer, if I may, just to answer these questions. So yeah. Abdulaziz asks regarding this breakdown, what the difference is between the historian function at level 3.5 and at level 3.
Okay, so there's a few duplicated things across this. It's our rendition of the Purdue model here. The reasoning between the duplication of historian specifically is in level 3 you might kind of see or more or less like a live historian, and then the one in level 3.5 might be kind of like a global historian that's ingesting a lot of things and is counted as the kind of like all-seeing oracle of everything that's going on. It's just kind of the more protected one. So in case your OT does get compromised or anything, you've still got a source to lean back on. It's the same with engineering workstations between level 2 and 3. Similar functionality, just slightly different, and they might not even have the duplication in every organization. It's just kind of for posterity and what we were kind of communicating through this diagram.
All right, thanks, Rick. And then there's a question actually 2 questions from Navid that maybe we can tackle at this point. Based on what you're saying, I'm going to paraphrase here. Is it fair to say that if these attacks could have been stopped in the IT infrastructure, we would have stopped most OT-related attacks? Is that what you're saying?
Kind of. Yeah. So some of the takeaways that I'd say from this are really focus on your network segregation, and also try and to the best of your organization's abilities, reduce the dependencies that OT has on IT for a number of different functionalities, which is really difficult in this day and age. So it's kind of actually getting more complicated, and this is one of the reasons for the whole like buzzword of IT-OT convergence. But yes, to an extent, yes. Sometimes stopping an attack in the IT will indeed stop it from proliferating to the OT. or it will at least mean that the OT has enough resilience to stay running. However, a number of attacks also directly enter the OT for a number of reasons. OT is weirdly connected to the internet more often than it should be, for a lot of remoting in purposes and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like it's a typical cybersecurity answer of it depends for that case.
Yeah. Jeroen also warned us that if we asked him any questions, he'd probably start his answer with "it depends," which is how I know that Jeroen knows what he's talking about. There are a few more questions still waiting, and I will get to those. Just a reminder to the rest of you, if you do have questions, then please pop them into the questions panel. But Rick, I want to give your voice a break and draw Nicholas into the conversation here. Nick, if I may. So Rick's study obviously looked at these publicly reported incidents, right, and try to categorize them using this framework, and this very interesting pattern emerges. You look at incidents from a very different perspective in your role as at the OT SOC. And so I want to ask your opinion on this data, and I also want to ask you your opinion on some of Navid's questions. But I guess before we can understand your answer, I just need to ask you a little bit about, like, what does an OT SOC actually do?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Nicholas, based in Brussels, and at OCD we created a dedicated OT SOC team to assist the customer really in the OT security journey that they are in. And my team gets into the picture once the customer has installed an OT security solution, okay, like a Cisco Cyber Evasion, a Nozomi, these type of things. If the customer does not have that, then our professional services teams can get involved and help with the design and the implementation of such solutions. But from there, we take it into our management, so that's a full 24/7, and we'll react on the incidents that are happening on the probes themselves, sure. But more importantly, we built an entire structure around the data that is provided by those probes. We basically go from raw collecting data to easy to read at a glance dashboarding and reports, because that's where you can spot the low-hanging fruits. And to answer a bit as well the question of Navid, it can come from a lot of places, but indeed network segmentation is one of them, and that you would spot quite easily if you actually take a look at the data gathered by some of the probes. Also, last but not least, absolutely not least, we also do event management. So that's security events that are raised by the probes in the OT environments of the customers. And what we do is that we aim to give actionable items. We aim at giving really pinpointing things to do, not giving a telephone book. Everybody can do that, but nobody will look at it. What we do is that we say, top 3 priorities, this, and this. Once we solve that, we move on. Okay, so that's a bit what the OT SOC does from my team. Yeah.
All right, so you're looking at a similar problematic, but from a very different point of view, right? So where Rick's looking at it from a very high level, when this whole thing progresses to the point that it's an incident that gets publicly reported, you're actually watching, minute and acute incidents as they're picked up and reported by probes. So, yep. What's your perspective on the story, on the patterns that Rick's data surfaces? Would you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see something different?
Yeah, I completely agree. In short, it's completely in line with what we see right now. The very vast majority of events that we have are still IT related. And as I was saying, quite a lot of time it's due to either non-existent segmentation, completely flat network across the entire factory, or poorly implemented segmentation. Not to say that none of the customers are there yet, but the vast majority of the events that we have tends to that approach of lacking a segmentation. We had customer with the guest Wi-Fi passing by into the OT factory. We had a famous case of a factory worker in the late shift working and having his Nintendo Switch for the control room. These type of things are absolutely not isolated. We had, and I know Jeroen and Simon have seen that as well, not so clean USB sticks being used by whoever, because that was the easiest way to transfer whatever data. So really these type of events. But what we need to understand is that those events can seem irrelevant, but it's really a noise. And everybody knows that noise reduction is at the core of what we need to do, because we aim to remove the alert fatigue of the engineers and the analysts, because we want to be able to react off what's actually important. So in a sea of hundreds of thousands of events or millions of events, spotting the 3 events that says stop CPU, upload program, start CPU might be challenging if you don't have the proper methodology to work on that data set. And that's what's really also what we do, is really the noise reduction aspect of it. So yeah, but
thanks. If I may, Nick, there's another question that's come in. In fact, it's both Jacob and Navid, who on the webinar, posed a similar question about the initial kind of attack vector. What are the primary, the most common attack vectors? I think is the way Jacob posed the question, and Navid wants to know where do these OT-related attacks initially start in the infrastructure? Do you have a view on that?
Well, where my team is placed in the network, we really see the pure internal to internal traffic. So that means we are as low as we can into that Purdue model that Rick was sharing a bit earlier. That's our aim, is that we are as low as we can so that we can spot what a firewall will not spot. For example, to have an event log on a firewall, you need to cross it. So my view on the data is really internal. I would be hard pressed to say that it never occurs that anything comes from the internet, but the view that I have on it is really purely internal. So that means, as I was saying, the home laptops, the USB sticks, these type of things, it's what I have visibility on. That's what I'm working on mostly. Right. Because also we have the regular CyberSoc that would catch a lot of internet-facing activities as well. Here I'm purely talking about the dedicated OT SOC team, which really looks as low as we can in the Purdue model.
Okay. I just want to ask the same question maybe to some of the other panelists, Simone and Jeroen. We haven't heard from you. Do you have a sense? I think the data that Rick collected doesn't perhaps have the granularity to know what the initial access vector was. Do either of you have a sense, an opinion on when OT environments are impacted, what part of the OT IT infrastructure is being hit first?
It depends. Yeah, you knew I was going to say that. I've seen various methods. Not too long ago, I've seen a client who managed to restore a 14-year-old worm from a USB stick onto an air-gapped network. Wow. It's also sometimes it's the laptop that the commissioning engineer uses, and fortunately, more and more those are pretty hygienic, pretty well taken care of, but there's still laptops that an engineer uses for weeks on the road, both to do his job and as an entertainment station at night in his hotel room, and those aren't very clean. So I've seen all sorts, but not enough of anything to distinguish a pattern. You maybe, Simone?
I see when they communicate to NAS server that we regularly have to check, is this a common communication? We see webcams communicating sometimes with suspicious traffic, things like that. So we see also the communication has started with the 3.5 NAS communication between the Purdue level 3 and 6, things like that. So we have regularly to check it if it's common communication. Most of the time it's internal communication, and most of the time it's related to also the communication between the workstation via, for example, remote tools to the OT environment. This is you have regularly to check, is this now the tool that they use the regular the tool, or is it malicious one? This is what I witness in the OT environment when I'm doing incident response.
Okay, but what I'm hearing, if I just paraphrase a summary there, is that the initial attack vectors, probably we don't have clear data on what those are, but it seems to be that they're quite diverse, right? So all the different ways that attackers get into IT networks would probably apply here also. Rick, I want to come back to you and just to the studio and to the panelists. I know I'm not sticking to a script here, so forgive me, but I know you're all clever enough to keep up. But we're getting very interesting questions, and I want to respond to those. Rick, so if I look at the conversation so far and I just summarize it back to you, then the data you looked at suggests three things. Firstly, when attack impacts OT, it's generally actually the IT that's being compromised. Secondly, where the attacks do impact OT via IT, it's predominantly cyber criminals that are considered responsible. And thirdly, when that all happens, it's mostly for the purpose of ransomware. So I guess the next question that your research then examines is, if cyber extortion, by that we mean ransomware, double extortion, etc., if that is such an effective and profitable criminal business model, which I think we all know that it is, then why aren't these criminals targeting and impacting the OT directly?
As in, why aren't they performing this kind of extortion attack on operational technology?
Yeah, why not hack the PLCs or the human interface devices or whatever it is, and perform ransomware or deliver ransomware to those?
So one of the things that is the kind of control that you have in place to build in resilience versus traditional IT encryption based ransomware is a good backup system, so that whenever you have a machine that gets compromised and ransomware is deployed, you just turn it off and restore from backup. That's only getting to the level of maturity in IT now that is that it's actually becoming particularly effective. However, in operational technology, if a PLC, for example, does actually has a fault, even not even from a cyber attack, it literally just breaks. The typical engineering response and recovery process for that kind of incident is to take the PLC off the wall and put a new one on the wall and then flush that from backup. So you can't just encrypt a PLC, because engineering response and recovery practices are already mature enough to essentially make that completely nullified. So to be able to actually launch this this kind of cyber attack, you need to have these criteria that are on screen that are almost like in a chronological order. So you need to be able to provide this credible threat, which already isn't really viable. It's kind of thwarted by engineering response and recovery practices. But then you need to keep going. You need to be able to demand the answer of ransom, provide proof of life that you actually have control and that you can deliver it back if necessary. You need to be able to pressure them, maybe with a time limit, for example. You need to facilitate negotiation through under control and everything. You need to be able to receive this payment, and then upon receipt of the payment, you need to credibly be able to actually return the environment back. And none of this is possible. There's no viable modus operandi. There's no viable method by which cyber criminals could do that in an operational technology environment. And even if it wasn't for those engineering response and recovery processes, it's also the case that if you did want to actually encrypt a PLC, even if it wasn't for that, you would need root access to each individual PLC to do that, which means that you are then going to have vulnerabilities that are effective for essentially, or exploits for vulnerabilities that are essentially for every device within every ecosystem for each firmware version of that device. And that's a really difficult thing to scale, because those kind of things aren't really that common, even with these slow patch times that are stereotypical with OT. It's not something that's reliable to scale the attack, so it's just really not viable to follow that same method of extortion.
All right. Rick, I want to come back to that in a minute, but just on an administrative note, we still have lots of questions coming in, and I still have lots of questions for you. So I just wanted to make it known that Rick and myself and the panelists, we will stay on this call beyond the hour. I apologize if we don't get to your question by the end of the hour, but stick around if you can, and we will try and just keep going until we can reasonably deal with all the questions. Yeah, so we won't stop hard on the hour. We'll keep going if there's still sufficient questions to answer. Rick, okay, so what you're saying is the predominant cybercrime business model now is extortion. Extortion in IT involves a tried and tested approach in which data is exfiltrated, things are encrypted. There's a key that can be returned to the victim if they pay the ransom. There's this threat that the data will be destroyed and or leaked. But there's also this very mechanical way in which the key can be returned to the victim and money is paid. And that works in IT, and it's very reliable, and it's proven to be very profitable. But it doesn't actually, for various technical reasons, it doesn't actually translate into an OT environment. One of them is what you mentioned, is because the PLCs can simply be replaced. But also, I think there's bigger challenges, like if you do something in an OT environment, you need to be able to compromise lots of different things because it's not as homogeneous as in IT. And whichever way you think about it, this business model for ransomware doesn't translate readily into OT environments. But ransomware is just a way of performing extortion, right? And in your work for RSA, what you explore is a way in which extortion could be performed in an OT environment without requiring necessarily encryption and data leakage. And you call that dead man's PLC. Can you talk us through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so when I first joined Orange, I was kind of thrown at the deep end of talking about cyber extortion. I knew it as ransomware prior to that, and Orange Cyber Defense, specifically Charles' team, like to have this term of cyber extortion, and it kind of got the cogs turning of, oh yeah, you don't have to actually encrypt things to do an extortion attack. So obviously the first thing that I had to do was get to thinking about how we could do this in operational technology. And this engineering response and recovery process thing was really what was standing in the way, because essentially every device was its own individual thing if you encrypt it, which means it's quite difficult to get around. Every device has to be able to tell on one another. Essentially, we have to have this kind of malicious accountability is what we've been calling it. So Deadman's PLC starts at the engineering workstation, which is within the operational technology already. Now that sounds like it's already starting at a almost science fiction level of a threat model, because we're already breached the operational technology. But what we've seen through the data that we've collected through other reports as well, that adversaries are finding no problem in actually getting to the operational technology. It's leveraging that for being able to do what they want with it. Usually it's been only like a very strategic thing from a state level perspective, that it's actually been attacked in any meaningful way other than kind of nuisance attacks or the type category 1 attacks that we described here today. So Deadman's PLC, we decided to start working on how could we actually leverage this malicious accountability. And we did so via essentially using the engineering workstation to add additional code to the PLCs such they spoke to one another. So we don't have enough time. This is a whole RSA talk that we would have to get through to do this. So I'm going to be very quick. We basically make sure that every device under attacker control is sending a heartbeat to one another, so that the receiver or the sender knows if either one isn't actually there anymore. So if one gets taken out, the other knows that it's not there. So for example, if the receiver doesn't receive one, it knows the sender is missing from the network and has been tampered with, and also vice versa as well. We add on top of this an alerting network such that if anything knows that the network of attack devices has been tampered with, that we will actually like send an alert out. So all the devices will then tell on each other and this will propagate out. If any of these devices do detect some sort of tampering and that they propagate out this alert, every device that gets this alert and sets their alert up will then start performing predefined malicious things in the actual physical world. So we'll actually start messing with the PLC's outputs. So what we'll do is, say for example, if a PLC has noticed that another one has been removed from the network, it will then basically start setting all, in our proof of concept at least, it will then start setting all its outputs to on. So that, for example, you'll have like pumps and valves that start going at full speed, which damages the pumps and valves, it messes with the physical world. Because of the level of access that we have in this threat model of getting to the engineering workstation, we actually get a lot of information about what's going on in the physical environment as well. So outside of a proof of concept, if we're doing this as an actual malicious attacker, we actually know a lot about the physical environment, and therefore what we can do is we can actually build up a really damaging attack, such that if the victim does try and tamper with the assets that we've controlled and we have under attack, we can perform something that genuinely does have a threat to human safety and the physical world.
Rick, thanks. So I love this work. I think it's fascinating. So what you've done is you've developed a concept that illustrates that a plant, a factory, a utility could be held to ransom with the threat of an actual kinetic impact. And I've seen the demo that you've done where the conveyor belt stops running and the boxes all pile up. And it's very funny to watch, but of course that could be really catastrophic, right? Because at the heart of this attack, you are sort of exploiting the functionality of that PLC to subvert the way the hardware it's connected to behaves, right? So
yeah,
flip a switch, turn a valve, stop a pump, start a pump, change the temperature, whatever it is, you're threatening to actually cause a physical effect in that environment, and it would be specific to that environment, right? With impacts that would be damaging in that specific environment.
correct.
So that's the first thing, right? So this is not about, oh, you can't, we've got your data, or, you know, we've encrypted your device. No, this is about, you know, something is going to overheat or open up or stop or run when it shouldn't. And then secondly, you demonstrate that through these two networks, the heartbeat and the alert network, which are injected into the code running on those PLCs, the PLCs themselves will detect and report if one of them is replaced, if one of them is taken out, if the code is changed, if another device is added onto the network. So correct. While the environment carries on running as before, right? It's unaffected. They also can't change anything on it. They can't take you out. They can't reboot the engineering workstation. They can't do they can't do anything to undermine your control of the environment. And then once they've paid, and you run a timer, I saw in the RSA demo, you run a timer, so it's very visual, and the guy can see, oh, this looks like movie hacking. And then if the payment isn't made, then these PLCs all execute whatever that action is, right? So all over your environment, things are going boom. But at the same time, if the victim does pay, you provide them with a code, and by inserting that code, they then cause this malicious action to be, or you cause the code to be disabled effectively. Absolutely. And it goes latent. And so that all the requirements for successful cyber extortion to be monetized now exist with the real threat of physical damage in an OT environment. And I think that's game changing. And of course, what you've developed is not a malicious tool. It's a proof of concept. But I think it does illustrate where OT attacks could go in the future. Rick, thanks thanks for that. As I mentioned, we are now on the hour, but we're going to carry on and try and answer some more questions. And I wonder, Jeroen, if I could drag you in for these. They're from Jakub. I hope, Jakub, that you are still on the line to hear these answers. But Jakub is interested in the security of hosts in levels 3 to 1 of the Purdue model, and specifically both Linux and Windows, but he's specifically interested in the value of running antivirus and EDR on those hosts. Do you have an opinion on that for us?
Antivirus is definitely a good idea for most environments. The challenge with that and with EDR is the response part. Some tools respond to a detection by placing a file in quarantine, and that's a big no-no in an OT environment. In the worst case, you may actually stop your production process because a workstation suddenly has the executable of the control process removed because it's mistaken for a piece of malware. So if you do run something, it needs to be in detection only mode, and any response needs to have a human intervention. Also, we tend to see a lot more Windows in OT than Linux. Sure, Linux is there, but I think 80–90% is Windows systems.
Yeah, so I suppose, going from the assumption that at the moment, OT is impacted via IT, and even Rick's Dead Man's PLC concept really involves initially at least a compromise of the engineering workstation, which is probably Windows. Having whatever security controls are available to you on those systems is a good idea. It doesn't sound like there's any reason not to do it. Jeroen, I want to ask you another question. This is my question, but I'm curious when thinking about the Dead Man's PLC concept and the idea that this attack starts by compromising the engineering workstation. Are there controls? What sort of controls would you recommend for the engineering workstation and for the programming environment on the engineering workstation? That's my first question. And my second question is, yeah, go ahead. Let's do that.
This is going to be this is going to sound almost childish, and yet I catch clients not doing it, and it's the basics really. Make sure that that station is in a physical location where not everybody can walk in. If there's a lock on the door, use it, preferably with a card reader. Secondly, an engineering workstation is not typically monitoring a process; it's used to modify it. So let's put a password lock on that. Maybe even log out if you're not using it. Elementary measures that a lot of people are not taking.
And Jeroen, what about turning it off or suspending it? What about running your engineering workstation in a VM and simply suspending it when it's not in use?
A VM, yeah, definitely. That's an option more and more. Although if you run older tooling, it could potentially be a challenge. I see a reluctance because a lot of people like the peace of mind that that system is up and running and available at a moment's notice. It's peace of mind that keeps people from doing it.
Yeah, but it would at least reduce the attacker's opportunity in terms of time and space to compromise that machine and then do the work that Rick described of actually injecting something like Dead Man's PLC into the code.
For example, I once ran into an engineering workstation that the client swore was on an air-gapped network and nobody else accessed it from the outside. So I looked at it and I said, well, somebody must have accessed it since that's not a standard Windows wallpaper on it.
I hear you. And then this is a question that I think I can direct towards you, Nick, and Simone. Maybe you have an answer also. The question reads, what sort of patterns do you see most in the OT SOC in recent times? And are there any real incident data sets available that reveal the root causes of attacks and incidents in OT?
Yeah, so I'll go first, and then Simone will most likely add to that or correct me to a certain extent. What we see a lot in terms of patterns and typical attacks, for example, is missed authentication throughout the network, so from a machine-to-machine authentication. But that's usually it's because it's so historic that some of the machines are not even there anymore, or everything changed since that authentication was set up, and it just stays in there and just tries for forever after. That's something that we see a lot. We also see a lot of how can I say this? The failed authentication is really a bulk of what we have. Also, quite surprisingly, is the network scanners, because with good intention, everybody says that you should scan your network, but should you to that extent, and should you just bombard your OT environment with regular IT scanners? That is something that we want to be very, very well aware of, because that can, as proven time and time again, break some of the production environment. If you do a regular IT scan towards a PLC that is absolutely not designed to take any type of packets like that, you will actually break it. So that's that sort of things. In terms of real data sets and real incidents that we found it with the usual triads of stop CPU, upload program, start CPU, into a time window where that was not supposed to happen, for example. And then we raise that to the customer, just making sure that if was this intended, yes or no, and then you move out and then you move on with the investigation. That's something that we found, but that's 3 log entry in millions. So that takes a bit of a methodology to get to.
Simone, a perspective from you on that?
Yes, and we see, Niklas, I agree to Niklas that we see also older scripts where the passwords are set in the script, or that the communication is not encrypted, so you can see the communication. And what is also a huge problem are supplier incidents. So the credentials that you have regularly to change if a supplier regarding the supply chain has an incident. This is what we see in our environment.
All right, good, thank you. All right, folks, I think I'm going to make space for just one more question. William from Sweden, I hope you're still with us, because I think your question was first and now we're answering it last. And I'm going to put you on the spot here again, Jeroen, but then invite anyone else.
No, Charles, you might have to direct that
Jeroen's
question
had to
somewhere else. You had to drop it.
Oh, okay. Well, any volunteers then? Any volunteers? This is the question we all dread. Do we anticipate benefits being provided by AI in the realm of OT security? Nick, maybe I can ask.
Well,
maybe I can answer it with regarding the EDR system we were talking about.
Yeah.
We can implement EDR into the OT environment. What we've got is more the preventive part of the EDR, but EDRs can also help us with machine learning. We have, for example, security tools in the environment with machine learning, giving us the feedback or alerting us. And what you really have to do in the OT environment, you have to understand your own environment regarding the application that are very often, if you implement an EDR, triggered as malware. So whitelisting is an important part to understand the OT environment, and then it makes sense to use an EDR and to let EDR learn in a machine learning way.
That makes sense. And then Navid actually, sorry, I said it was the last one. Navid just asked NDR. Do you see a place for that? Is it a valuable control?
NDR is one of like the major controls in OT.
Yeah. And being enhanced by AI, I suppose so, right? eventually?
Yeah, Nico's probably the best one to speak to this, given that's what he works with at the moment, predominantly.
Yeah, of course. Let's just AI is obviously a topic in itself. The vast answer is yes, but don't just enable everything by default and expect it to do what you're supposed to do yourself, and bring your level of intelligence and understanding, because we need to be concerned about understanding everything that's impacted by the tiniest changes in those environments, because sometimes it can really be the domino effect. And reluctant will be an understatement into my into my view on enabling automatic response and these type of things into those environments. It's because for just like firewall vendors, for example, every firewall vendor has a flavor of an OT dedicated package, for example, that can create firewall rule on the fly. Yeah, sure, but do you want that? That's another question.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being popular in production environments where people are reluctant to turn off engineering workstations that aren't being used.
Yeah.
All right. There was one more question from Daniel Ehrenreich, I think, who's inviting us to watch something on YouTube, which I'm loath to do, Daniel, because I think you might. the paranoid part of me thinks you may be punking me. But we will have a look at the video, and then Daniel will drop you a note via email. I think we have your details, and let you know what we think of that presentation. But I think that's going to be all we have time for
Charles,
today. Yeah, Nicholas.
There is also the possibility to run a quick poll about the state
yes,
of.
Okay. Shall we do that, Studio? Can we? We did have a poll that we would love to hear your opinion on. We're very keen to understand, for the people still on this call, if you don't mind sharing with us, how you would describe your state of maturity within OT security. Whereabouts are you on the OT security journey? You're right at the beginning, kind of just trying to figure out what it all means, or are you, on the other end of the spectrum, already very mature, integrating IT and OT, trying to optimize your program? If you could take a few minutes to pop your answers into the poll, I think we'd really appreciate that. Studio, Daniel asks if we can give him a mic. I don't know if that's possible. Daniel, I think we may not be able to do that, but I tell you what, very happy to arrange a chat with you. Always keen to hear opinions and have the discussion. So I will make a point of ensuring that we reach out to you, and then we can have a look at the video and have a chat with you. Okay, so the responses have come in. I think we've got most of them now. Maybe we can show those responses online. There you go. All right, so the majority, a good 50% of people still on this call are have initiated an OT security program of some sort, and are, I guess, trying to understand where to go next, what to do first, and what the priorities should be. Then there's about 20% or even more mature than that, and have already implemented solutions of some sort and are aiming to enhance their posture. 10% have a program that is in full swing, and I guess would be considered to be mature at some level. And then at the bottom levels, 15 plus 7 makes 22%, are either sort of generally unsure about OT security specifics, or uncertain about even where to start with the program for OT security. panel, I think we're going to leave it there, unless does anybody feel they want to comment on this poll?
It's good to see that that at least we're not everyone's uncertain. It's very reassuring to see people have OT security programs in full swing. But yeah, that's that's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, Daniel, as I said, we will get back to you, to the panel, Rick for your excellent work, Nick for your inputs, Simone. It's always so interesting and valuable to talk to you. Thank you. Vaynant, unfortunately, had to go back to doing actual work, but thanks to him also. Maddie in the studio, and then of course to those of you who have generally shared this hour with us and invested your time in meeting with us. Thank you very much. It's great to have you. We hope you'll attend future webinars. We will be reaching out to you after this with copies of the slides. A recording of the webinar will be sent to you, as well as a survey just asking you what you think, what you thought about the webinar, how you experienced it, and what what we could do to improve. So we will stay in touch. We look forward to hearing from you and talking with you more. But until then, thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cybercrime is the world's third biggest economy. Every company is affected. This is big, important stuff. And nobody's taking this seriously.
Jeremy, you are downloading an app. Suzanne, what do you do?
Jeremy, no! How useful was it? 0 use. Fun though. Really hurt him, I think.
Orange Cyber Defense.